The Westfield is where my wife walked every evening for 16 years. Same blue rubber boots, same border collie trotting at her heel, same route along the fence line at sunset, the way the light came gold across the bluegrass at the end of the day. After she died, I kept walking it every Sunday at sunset, alone, in her boots, 2 sizes too small. It hurt. I did it anyway. Last fall, the new HOA president across the road decided that field was the perfect location for her daughter's outdoor wedding. She didn't ask permission. She bribed a county clerk to forge a permit with my name on it. She set up 200 white folding chairs on my wife's field and hired a string quartet from Spokane and ordered a 3-tier wedding cake and told her daughter that I had agreed to the whole arrangement. What Bridget Howard did not know was that I had been a Kentucky farmer for 33 years, that my manure spreading schedule was on file with the county 14 days in advance, that the Right to Farm Act made my agricultural operation completely untouchable by any HOA complaint she could ever file, and that on Saturday morning at 7:05, I was going to drive a John Deere 7250R onto that field with 2,000 gallons in the tank and conduct the most legally protected act of justice in Bourbon County history. This is the story of my wife's field and the morning it came home. My name is Wyatt Caldwell. I have farmed 287 acres of bluegrass country in Bourbon County, Kentucky, since my father handed me the deed in 1991. He had it from his father. His father bought it in 1894 from a Confederate widow named Letitia Anders, who needed the money and didn't want to look at the back 40 anymore. The original survey is still framed in the front parlor. I run a small cow-calf operation, 48 head of Black Angus. I cut hay off the Westfield every June and again every September. I drive a 2008 Ford F250 with a tailgate dent I have never bothered to fix. I am 56 years old. I served 4 years in the Army from 1988 to 1992 and do not generally talk about it. The farm has not been a wealthy operation in 3 generations. It has been a profitable one in only 2. But it has been ours for 131 years, and the land has fed every person on the deed. My wife Maggie died 4 years ago this past June, breast cancer. We had 18 months from diagnosis to the morning I found her hand cold in mine. She was 49. We had bought the Westfield together in 1995, with money she saved teaching 2nd grade at Paris Elementary. After we paid it off in 2003, she walked it every evening at sunset without missing a day. Same blue rubber boots, a border collie named Pearl trotting at her heel, the Kentucky light going long and orange across the grass. Pearl died the winter before Maggie did. Maggie said it was a small mercy. I didn't argue. After Maggie was gone, I kept walking the Westfield every Sunday at sunset, alone, in her boots. Everyone in Bourbon County knew I did it. Nobody ever talked about it to me directly. Sheriff Earl Vans used to drive past my fence line on Sunday evenings just to make sure I was upright. Pastor Calvin Hatfield used to skip the second hymn so he could be in the parking lot to nod at me when I pulled in. My attorney, Hollis Mortensen, never sent me a bill for the entirety of 2022. I do not know if my friends understood that I knew what they were doing. I think they did. I think they didn't want me to thank them for it. Bourbon County is that kind of place. The trouble started in 2020. A developer named Doug Howren bought the old Pentagon dairy farm across the road and put up 142 luxury homes on it. 3-car garages, stone veneer facades, a wrought iron gate with the words, "The Meadows at Whitestone," in gold leaf. None of the new families came from Bourbon County. Most came from Lexington and Louisville. They bought houses they had only seen on Zillow. They moved in expecting bluegrass without any of the things that grow it. Doug Howren's wife Bridget became HOA president in 2021. She wore Lily Pulitzer prints over white jeans and walked her Cocker Spaniel down the gravel shoulder of our shared frontage road every morning at 7:30. Within a month of taking the gavel, she filed her first formal complaint with the Bourbon County Health Department. about the smell of cattle manure drifting east on the spring breeze. It was dismissed in 4 days under the Kentucky Right to Farm Act. She filed 13 more over the next 20 months, all dismissed. The complaints were starting to look less like complaints and more like a paper trail Bridget was building towards something else. Then in March, she walked up my driveway in a pink linen blazer. She offered me $5,000 to rent my Westfield for her daughter Madison's October wedding. I was leaning on the fence by the barn, drinking black coffee out of an enamel mug that had been my father's. I let her finish. Then I said, "Ma'am, I have a manure spread scheduled on that field the week of your daughter's wedding, and that field is where my wife used to walk. So thank you, but no." Her smile did something I had seen before on the faces of people who have never been told no and don't intend to accept it now. It didn't fall, it hardened. "Mr. Caldwell, you will regret this." She walked back to her pearl-white Range Rover. I poured the rest of my coffee out under the fence and went inside and called my attorney. I had been farming long enough to know exactly what was coming. By April, Bridget had been seen twice walking the perimeter of my Westfield with a Lexington wedding planner named Celine Wickersham, both of them in white sneakers and big sunglasses, neither one acknowledging the no trespassing sign nailed to the fence post. By May, 3 more health department complaints had been filed, all dismissed. In late July, Celine Wickersham filed a request with the Bourbon County Tourism Office for wedding venue accreditation of a parcel that did not belong to her client. That request was denied. Celine's name was added to a list that would later prove very useful in court. In late August, I drove down to a livestock auction in Louisville to bid on replacement heifers. My daughter Eliza came from her school to have dinner with me on Bardstown Road. We talked about a man named Andrew she was thinking about marrying. I tried to listen without making the face fathers make. I drove back on Sunday evening through soft, slanted September lights that made the hay rolls in every passing field look bronze. I made the turn onto Caldwell Lane at 6:45 in the evening. 6 unmarked trailers were parked along the gravel shoulder of my Westfield. 2 crews in matching navy polos were unloading aluminum tent poles from a flatbed. A diesel generator was humming behind the gazebo I had built for Maggie's 50th birthday. A man in a yellow vest was driving an auger into my pasture to set foundations for a wooden dance floor. Strings of unlit fairy lights lay coiled in plastic bins. A florist truck idled by the gate with its refrigeration unit running. I pulled the pickup onto the shoulder. I rolled the window down. I did not get out. I let the muscles in my forearms unclench one at a time, the way the army taught me to do before something I would later be questioned about. A foreman jogged over, sweating, friendly. "Sir, this lane's closed for the next 6 days. Private event set up in progress." "Is that so?" "Yes, sir. Wedding next Saturday. Permit and everything." "Whose permit?" He pulled a laminated card from his clipboard and held it through the window. "Temporary event permit, Bourbon County. Venue, Caldwell Family Farm, West Pasture. Approved. Venue operator, Wyatt Caldwell. Approval, T. Pickerel, zoning." I looked at it. I looked at the gazebo Maggie had unwrapped a birthday ribbon on 6 years before. She'd still had her hair then, her color. The rest of us had still believed it was going to be all right. I rolled the window back up. I drove the half-mile to the farmhouse. I went inside. I took my father's enamel mug down from the shelf above the sink, filled it with bourbon, and drank it slowly at the kitchen table while the sun went down over the tents going up on my wife's field. Then I called Hollis Mortensen at home. He picked up on the second ring. "Hollis, there are wedding tents going up on my Westfield. They have a county permit with my name on it. I never signed any such thing." A long silence. "Stay where you are. Don't touch a thing. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Hollis Mortensen is a 68-year-old country lawyer who keeps 3 sharpened pencils and a yellow legal pad in his jacket pocket at all times. He has been my family's attorney since 1979. He grew up 2 miles from my farmhouse on a tobacco farm his grandmother was forced to walk away from in 1962 because the IRS made her. He has tried more agricultural law cases in Kentucky than any man living. He arrived at 6:58 in his 2014 Buick, walked the field perimeter with me without speaking, photographed every tent stake and trailer and laminated sign, and read the permit 3 times. We walked back to the farmhouse. "Wyatt," he said, "they have forged a county permit on your land. That is not a civil matter. That is a felony." I made him coffee. He sat down. "Here is what we do. Tomorrow morning, you and I drive to the HOA office. You hand Bridget Howard a notice of trespass. I serve it personally. You do not raise your voice. You do not threaten. Then I drive to Frankfort and sit down with a friend at the Kentucky State Police Public Integrity Unit. By Thursday, this woman will not know what kind of weather is coming for her." Then I said the thing I had been turning over since I'd watched that auger go into my pasture. "Hollis, I'm scheduled to spread liquid manure on that field on Saturday." Hollis set his coffee cup down. "It's filed with the county 14 days in advance. Right to Farm Act, Section 3, Subsection B. It's the routine fall spread. I do it every year after the second cutting." Hollis looked at me for a long time over the rim of his cup. "Son, you understand what you're suggesting? I'm asking whether I have to cancel a properly filed agricultural operation because a stranger put a wedding tent on my land without my consent." The corners of Hollis Mortenson's mouth moved a quarter of an inch. He took out his yellow legal pad. He clicked one of his pencils. He wrote a single sentence at the top. "Operation Regina, KRS 413.072. Regina, his grandmother, the one the IRS chased off. He looked up. "I have been waiting for this case my entire life." The next morning at 9:15, Hollis and I walked into the HOA office at the Meadows. Bridget was sitting behind a marble-top desk in a coral cardigan with a vase of pink peonies at her elbow. I handed her the notice of trespass. Hollis read it aloud. Bridget did not stop smiling. She slid the laminated permit across the desk. "Mr. Caldwell, the county has authorized this event venue. You are not in a position to object." "Ma'am, I never signed any permit." "The county has the signed copy on file, filed by Theodore Pickerel, Bourbon County Zoning Office. You are welcome to dispute it in court after the wedding." She added with that hardened smile that told me exactly who she was. "You should have taken my offer." Hollis put his hand on my arm. I did not speak. We walked out. That afternoon, Hollis drove to Frankfort. That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of buttermilk and watched the diesel generator hum across the field that had been Maggie's. I did not feel angry. I felt patient. The way a fire feels when it has not yet been lit. I had a manure spreader in the equipment barn. I had a 4,000-gallon tank. I had a schedule on file with the Bourbon County Agricultural Extension Office. I had a sheriff who had hunted with my father, an extension agent whose grandmother had known my mother, an attorney who had been waiting for this case since 1962, and a wife who had walked that field in blue rubber boots for 16 years. I had everything I needed. On Wednesday morning, Hollis called. "Wyatt, the forged permit has been confirmed by the state. No record of your signature, no notary, no county fee paid. Theodore Pickerel stamped it himself, out of order. He has been on the take from Doug Howard's commercial real estate company for 2.5 years. 3 payments a year, under the table, totaling $31,400. KSP Forensic Accounting traced every dollar through a Lexington check cashing shop owned by Doug's cousin. The Public Integrity Unit has quiet warrants on Pickerel, Doug Howard, and Bridget Howard. They want to execute Saturday morning at sunrise. They want your manure spread to draw out the wedding crowd in the news camera. They want the footage. They want the headline. And they want your field fertilized on the schedule you filed in August." I closed my eyes. "Hollis, there's one thing I need to do before Saturday. I need to talk to the bride." A silence. Then Hollis said very carefully, "Wyatt, that is a very good idea." That Thursday evening, I called Madison Howard. I introduced myself. I asked if she would meet me for coffee Friday morning at the Java Brewer in Paris. She paused for a long time, then she said, Yes, sir. Madison walked in Friday morning at 8:05 in a pale yellow sundress, hair in a French braid, no makeup. She was 24 years old and looked 19. There was a tremor in her left hand she couldn't quite hide, and she kept it tucked under her thigh in the booth. I had ordered her a vanilla latte. She thanked me very quietly. Mr. Caldwell, Miss Howren. She held her cup in both hands. My mother told me you signed off on the venue. She said it was a paid rental. She said she'd been planning it with you for months. When she told me you were the property owner, I asked what your wife thought about it. She paused. She said your wife had passed, but had loved my mother dearly. I let her get to the end. Then I reached into the leather folder beside me and laid the forged permit and Hollis's affidavit on the table. Madison read the affidavit twice. Her hands began to shake. She didn't cry the way her mother would have cried. She cried the way a young woman cries when she suddenly understands she spent 24 years being told a version of her own life that turns out not to have been true. Quietly, without wiping her face. Mr. Caldwell, I am so sorry. I had no idea. I waited until she could lift her cup. Then I told her two things. The first was that her wedding was going forward on Saturday, just not on my land. I had a neighbor named Ned Garrison, whose family had built a stone barn outside Versailles in 1873. Ned had a coffee pot going right that morning and was waiting for her call. The barn was hers, free of charge. The second was that on Saturday morning at 7, I was going to drive a manure spreader onto my west field and apply 2,000 gallons of liquid cattle manure exactly as I had filed in August. The Kentucky State Police would be present. They were also going to arrest her mother, her father, and a county clerk on charges of bribery, forgery, and conspiracy. She read every word twice. She set the affidavit down. Mr. Caldwell, thank you for telling me. I would have walked down that aisle thinking my mother had paid you. I would have shaken your hand in good faith. I want you to know I would have meant it. I know that, sweetheart. She was quiet for a moment. What was your wife's name? Margaret, Maggie. My mother told me her name was Susan. She said Susan loved gardenias. I did not say anything for a moment. Madison, your mother did not know my wife. She nodded once, slowly. She stood up. She thanked me for the coffee. She took the slip of paper with Ned Garrison's number on it and walked out into the cool Bourbon County morning. By 8:45, she had a new venue. By 9:15, half the wedding party knew. By noon, the caterer had agreed to move. By 3 in the afternoon, Madison's father's older brother, who had not spoken to Doug in 11 years, had agreed to walk Madison down the aisle. Madison did not call her mother once that day. Bridget Howren did not yet know that was exactly how I wanted it. By Friday afternoon, every piece was in place. Sheriff Earl Vance, a 64-year-old former Marine who had grown up shooting jackrabbits behind my father's barn, sat in my kitchen at 1 in the afternoon and drank a glass of buttermilk while I walked him through the schedule. He had been a pallbearer at Maggie's funeral. Wyatt, I'll be there at 6:45. 2 deputies and cruisers, lights off. I will not engage Mrs. Howren unless she physically obstructs you. I will not let anybody touch the tractor. He drained his glass. Wyatt, I have been waiting 4 years to see somebody do something for you. Your father would be proud. Pat Brenneman, the county extension agent, came by at 3 with 3 certified copies of my August 22nd filing and a printout of the Right to Farm Act with the relevant subsections highlighted. Wyatt, the statute protects established agricultural operations from nuisance claims by people who moved in afterward. You're a 4th-generation operation. The Meadows was built in 2019. You are protected. They are not. As long as you filed your schedule, applied at standard agronomic rates, and haven't increased your operation size beyond historical baseline, you are bulletproof. She handed me a typed sheet, an agronomic application rate certification bearing her signature. Pat, why are you putting your name on this for me? She shrugged. Because the law says I can. Because Bridget Howren filed a complaint last spring claiming you had cattle manure run off into her sprinkler system, and I spent 3 days proving she was lying. Because my grandmother knew your mother. Pick a reason, Wyatt. At 5 o'clock, Hollis arrived with a thick manila folder. Inside, a quiet title affidavit, a draft civil complaint, a federal mail fraud predicate, and 3 sealed declarations from Madison Howren, Ned Garrison, and Celine Wickersham, who had agreed to flip on Bridget the moment she realized the permit was forged. Hollis poured himself a glass of buttermilk. Wyatt, what time tomorrow? 6:15. I'll ride the tractor with you. I looked at him. He was 68. He had not been on a tractor since 1981. Hollis, Wyatt, I have been waiting on this case my entire life. You are not riding alone. The phone rang at 9:45. Bridget Howren. I let it ring. It rang 9 more times that night. Then, at 10:04, headlights blazed across my front porch. Her pearl-white Range Rover pulled in, a Kenny Chesney song leaking from the radio. She walked up the steps in her coral cardigan and low-heeled white pumps. She set a black leather briefcase on my porch railing. She unlatched it. Inside were 40 bound stacks of $100 bills. $50,000, I would later learn. Mr. Caldwell, I would very much like to come to a reasonable accommodation. My daughter's wedding is tomorrow. I am asking you, neighbor to neighbor, to cancel your manure spread for 1 day. I did not speak for a moment. Then I reached very slowly into my left breast pocket and took out my phone. I held it up so she could see the red recording light. Mrs. Howren, the cameras on this porch have been recording since you turned into my driveway. The cordless phone on my lap has been live with Bourbon County Sheriff's Dispatch since 10:03. The audio of this conversation will be on Sheriff Earl Vance's desk before I go to sleep. The $50,000 you are attempting to hand me will be Exhibit 4 in the federal bribery case against you. Please close the briefcase. Please get off my porch. Please go home and explain to your daughter that her wedding has been moved. For 3 seconds, Bridget did not move. Her eyes moved between the briefcase, my phone, and the cordless on my lap. Then she made a sound I will never forget. The noise of a woman whose entire life model had just informed her it was no longer going to work. 49 years of practiced charm collapsed in half a breath. She slammed the briefcase shut. She started down the steps, stopped halfway, turned back. Wyatt, your wife. I stood up. Bridget, you will not say her name. You will not stand on my porch and you will not say her name. Go home. She went. The gravel kicked under her tires going out. I sat back down. I drained the last inch of buttermilk. I called Earl directly. Earl, she just left. Briefcase of cash. Tried to bribe me on 4 cameras in dispatch. A pause. Beautifully done. KSP stages at the Marathon Station on 6/27. They'll move the moment your PTO turns on. Get some sleep, Wyatt. Your father would be proud. Saturday, October 18th was the kind of clear bluegrass dawn that smells like coffee from 3 miles away. I woke at 4:45. I made a pot in the percolator that had been Maggie's. I put on the flannel shirt she gave me for Christmas in 2020. I walked to the equipment barn at 5:15 and started the John Deere 7250R. Let it warm up 20 minutes. Check the manure spreader hitch. Check the 4,000-gallon tank, already filled to 2,000 gallons by my hired hand, Sonny Albritton, who had been with me since 1998. The tank had a fan spray nozzle calibrated to a 30-foot arc at standard PTO speed. I greased the gimbals one last time. Check the pressure gauge. Check the wind. 3 knots out of the west. Steady. Perfect distribution conditions for a hayfield application in mid-October. Hollis pulled up at 6:09 in his 2014 Buick. He climbed into the cab. He buckled himself in. He looked at me through the windshield. He nodded once. Sheriff Earl Vance arrived at 6:28 in a county pickup, followed by 2 cruisers with their lights off. "Counselor, you riding shotgun?" Earl called up. Sheriff, I have been waiting on this case since 1962. Earl nodded. KSP is staged at the Marathon. They'll move the moment you turn on the PTO. Madison is in Versailles. The Garrison barn is full. Pastor Hatfield is officiating at 2. Madison's uncle is walking her down the aisle. I closed my eyes for 1 second. Then I opened them. Let's go. I pulled the John Deere out of the equipment barn at 6:43. Earl's pickup fell in behind me. The 2 cruisers lined up behind that. We drove the half-mile to the gate of the Westfield. The diesel generator was already running. The catering trucks were unloading. 200 white folding chairs were lined up under the largest sailcloth tent. The wedding cake, 3 tiers of white buttercream hand-painted with gardenias, stood on a cart by the stage. A string quartet was tuning instruments. I stopped the tractor at the gate. Celine Wickersham walked over with her clipboard. Sir, this area is closed for a private event. Ma'am, this area is a hayfield filed for fertilization at 7 a.m. Please stand back. She looked at Hollis. She looked at the sheriff. She looked at the 2 cruisers. She did the math faster than anyone else on that field that morning. She raised her clipboard in surrender and stepped aside. I unlatched the gate. I drove in. I lined up at the north corner. I let the engine idle. It was 6:59. Hollis looked at his watch. Wyatt, it's time. I put my hand on the PTO switch. I waited for the second hand on the dashboard clock to sweep past the 12. Then I turned it on. The PTO engaged at 7:05. The first 30 feet of liquid manure left the fan spray nozzle at 38 pounds per square inch. It arced across the north end of the field in a perfect brown sheet. The smell hit before the spray did. The smell of 2,000 gallons of properly aged liquid cattle manure, traveling exactly the way Pat Brenneman had told me it would. West to east, 3 knots, a steady downwind plume that opened across the entire 2-acre wedding setup in under 40 seconds. It hit the catering crew. It hit the string quartet. It hit the wedding cake. It hit the sailcloth tents and the white folding chairs and the dance floor and the bar. It hit Bridget Howrin's pearl-white silk robe at 7:06 as she came running out of the largest tent screaming, "Stop him! Stop him! Stop him!" Sheriff Earl Vans stepped out of his pickup and walked into the field. He raised both hands, calm and steady. "Ma'am, step back. This is a properly filed agricultural operation under Kentucky Revised Statutes 413.072. Mr. Caldwell is operating within the law. Step back, ma'am." "He's destroying my daughter's wedding." "Ma'am, your daughter is in Versailles." For 3 seconds, Bridget did not understand what he had said. Then she did. She turned to look at the tents, already saturated, canvas drooping with brown mist, dance floor pooling, the wedding cake toppling sideways as the catering staff tried to drag it to safety. Then she sat down on the wet grass in her silk robe and screamed. The kind of scream that comes from a person whose entire decade of bad decisions cashes out in front of 200 witnesses simultaneously. The string quartet ran with their instruments held overhead. The wedding planner sprinted toward her SUV. The white bulb lights flickered as the cables shorted on wet ground. Guests who had just arrived in rent-a-town cars stood at the gravel shoulder with their mouths open, still holding gift bags, their dry cleaning still in plastic. Someone's grandmother fainted. Someone's nephew started filming on his phone. A teenage boy in a clip-on bow tie laughed so hard he had to sit down on a folding chair. A moment later, he was wearing the spray. I drove the tractor in a slow, methodical, agronomic pattern across the entire setup. The fan spray covered every tent stake, every aluminum pole, every linen tablecloth, every floral centerpiece. Application rate, 1,946 gallons per acre, well within Bourbon County's recommended agronomic range. At 7:17, 12 minutes into the spread, 3 black Kentucky State Police vehicles pulled through the gate. Lieutenant Maren Polk of the Public Integrity Unit stepped out with a sealed federal warrant. She walked to where Bridget was still sitting in the wet grass. "Bridget Marlene Howrin, you are under arrest on charges of forgery in the first degree, bribery of a public official, conspiracy to defraud, and criminal trespass. You have the right to remain silent. The cuffs went on at 7:19. Doug Howren was arrested at 7:23 on the 18th green of the Lexington Country Club, where he had been pretending to play golf while waiting to drive to the wedding. Theodore Pickerel was arrested at his kitchen table at 7:26 while pouring himself a bowl of cereal. Celine Wickersham had already turned herself in 2 days prior on the strength of Hollis's sealed declaration in exchange for a misdemeanor plea. At 7:42, I shut off the PTO. I climbed down. I walked across the field to where Bridget was being placed in the back of an unmarked KSP vehicle. I stopped 6 feet from her. I said the only thing I said all morning. Ma'am, this was my wife's field. You walk it again, you'll be doing it in handcuffs. The door closed. The vehicle pulled away. I walked back to the tractor. Hollis was leaning against the rear tire, drinking the last of his coffee, watching the bluegrass sun come up over Bourbon County. Wyatt, he said, best Saturday I've had in 20 years. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, Madison Howren married Bryce in Ned Garrison's stone barn outside Versailles. She wore the dress her grandmother had worn in 1962. Her uncle, Doug Howren's older brother, who had not spoken to Doug since 2014, walked her down the aisle. Pastor Hatfield officiated. Ned's wife served sweet tea and fried chicken to 114 guests under string lights they had hung that morning. The flowers were wildflowers picked from Ned's fence line. Bryce wore a tuxedo with a faint streak of manure dried on the left cuff. Madison laughed more in those 4 hours than she had laughed all year. I did not attend. I was on my porch. That evening at sunset, I walked the west field in Maggie's blue rubber boots. The smell was strong. I did not mind. The grass would come back greener in spring than it had been in 5 years. The field was hers again. I walked the full perimeter the way she had walked it for 16 years. I cried for the first time in 4 years. Then I went inside. Bridget pleaded guilty the following March on 6 counts. 4 years federal. Doug took 6. Theodore Pickerel cooperated and received 18 months, along with the permanent loss of his county position. The Meadows HOA was placed under court-ordered receivership for 1 full year. A new board was elected in May, led by a retired schoolteacher from Lexington named Linda Petticoat, who had been quietly horrified by Bridget since she moved in. The first action of the new board was to send me a fruit basket and a formal letter of apology signed by every member, including 3 families who had voted for Bridget twice. The second action was to amend the HOA covenants to formally recognize the Kentucky Right to Farm Act and acknowledge that no resident of the Meadows had any authority over agricultural operations on adjoining parcels. I sent the fruit basket to the food pantry at First Baptist Paris. I framed the letter. Madison and Bryce sent me a wedding photograph from Ned's barn, the frame hand-painted with small gardenias. The card said, Mr. Caldwell, thank you for telling me the truth. I will spend the rest of my life trying to deserve it. I keep the photograph on the mantel next to Maggie's. Hollis and I incorporated the Margaret Caldwell Legacy Defense Fund the following spring, a 501c3 nonprofit providing free legal representation to small family farms in Kentucky, Indiana, Ohio, and Tennessee facing nuisance lawsuits, encroaching HOA boards, predatory development offers, and forged county permits. We staffed it with 2 retired attorneys, a paralegal, and 1 full-time extension agent named Pat Brenneman, who took early retirement from the county to work for us. In the first year, we represented 23 farms. In the second, 67. The logo of the fund is a small woman in blue rubber boots walking across a hayfield at sunset with a border collie at her heel. The West Field came back greener than it had been in a decade. Sonny Albritton said the field that fall produced more bales per acre than any of us had ever seen come off Caldwell land. He attributed it to agronomic discipline. Hollis attributed it to Maggie laughing. I did not argue with either of them. This past October, on the 2nd anniversary of the wedding that never happened on my land, Madison drove down from Cincinnati with her husband and their newborn son. She asked if she could walk the West Field with me at sunset. At the gazebo, she stopped and looked west into the sun. Mr. Caldwell, what was Maggie's favorite flower? Black-eyed Susan. She nodded. She reached into a small paper cup she had been carrying since Cincinnati and knelt down and planted a black-eyed Susan plug at the base of the gazebo post. I did not cry that day, but I felt Maggie laugh. After they drove back, I walked the field one more time. The black-eyed Susan was small. The bluegrass was strong. The October sun was setting behind the gazebo the way it had set for 16 years before the trouble began. For the first time since Maggie died, I understood what she had been trying to tell me on the last morning I held her hand. The land outlasts the people who try to take it. The land outlasts the people who love it too. What we leave on it, a porch, a flower, a memory, a fight worth winning, is what makes it ours. Here is the lesson that every farmer and every landowner who has ever had a neighbor decide their rules apply to your land needs to carry from this story. Bridget Howard didn't fall because somebody was meaner than her. She fell because she spent 2 years filing nuisance complaints and escalating conflicts against a man who had been farming the same 287 acres for 33 years, and she mistook his quiet for weakness. She thought because he was alone after his wife died, he was breakable. She was wrong about both. The strongest men in any neighborhood are usually the quietest ones. They have attorneys on retainer they've known for 40 years. They have schedules on file with the county. They have receipts. They have sheriffs who used to hunt with their fathers. And when the moment comes, they have the absolute legal right to do exactly what their established operation has always done, regardless of what someone else built on the land across the road. Know what you own. File what you're going to do. Let the law carry the weight. And never, ever let someone stand on your porch and invoke the name of a person they did not know, in a place where that person is still very much present. If an HOA has ever tried to take your land, your livelihood, or your peace because they thought you were too small or too quiet to fight, drop your story in the comments. I want to hear it. Subscribe because there are more stories like this one, and I will see you in the next one.